Lekutei Sichos Chelek Chaf Aleph. The Sicha of Shemos Beis, Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. We are also learning L'schus our dear friend Yosef Shlema ben Risha for a refuah Shlema ukreva. Very, very fascinating Gishmaka Sicha. We're going to learn that beyond what the Eibishter promises us, and the Eibishter certainly fulfills all of his promises, Avram Avinu, our father, steps in to demand even more than what the Eibishter promised. And ultimately the Eibishter fulfills that because Avram is asking for it. But let's see the context here in the lead up to the Geulas Mitzrayim. The pasuk says, and Hashem says to Moshe, I will grant favor to this people in the eyes of Egypt, which is what Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu at the very beginning. It's still in Parashas Shemos, when Hashem is still informing Moshe of what's going to happen, that there's going to be a Yetzias Mitzrayim. Hashem tells him that at that point, I'm going to grant favor to this people, to this nation, meaning in the eyes of Egypt, and then they're going to give the Yidden their wealth. The Medrash says, I will grant favor to this people. This is what I said to Avram, that afterwards they're going to go out with great wealth. And I'm in the future going to put you in the grace of the Egyptians, so that they should lend you their stuff, their goods, and the Yidden should leave Mitzrayim laden with goods. So that way Avram Avinu should not be able to complain. There shouldn't be an opening for him to complain. To say, the part of the prophecy that they're going to be enslaved and oppressed, he fulfilled. But then he didn't go and fulfill the second part of the prophecy, that they're going to leave with great wealth, and therefore what I have to do is I have to make sure that I grant favor to this people in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they're going to give all of their wealth. That's what the Medrash says, that this v'nasati es cheina'am is in order to fulfill my promise to Avram. Now, the bavarnish v'naschalas divrei Medrash masha amarti la'Avram v'acher chayetz b'chuz gadol. The fact that the Medrash has to clarify, as it does right in the beginning, that this is this is a reference to what I said to Avram, that they were going to go out with great wealth. That's understood very simply. The Yosef stellt sich the shaila, because immediately when seeing these words, a question arises. Why is it that immediately, before Moshe even accepts the mission, and certainly before he leaves Midian, when he's still telling him about this whole concept of going out of Mitzrayim, already at that point, why does he tell him that? It seems like to be a detail. Obviously, there's going to be makkos, there's going to be other things. This idea that the Yitzrim are going to find favor in the eyes of in their eyes, they're gonna favor the Jewish people. That seems like a detail. Why is it so necessary already at this point for it to be brought up? For them, for their Medrash. And therefore the Medrash has to explain, as the midved gemeint and ikr tnaivas and meglich the mishalach eschem, because we're talking about a major condition which makes the going out of Mitzrayim possible. If prior to the going out of Mitzrayim, there's going to be the fact that I will grant favor to this people in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they're going to loan out their goods. Which that would be the fulfillment of Hashem's promise from the very first time he introduced this idea of Galus and ultimately Geula, the redemption from Mitzrayim. In other words, the Medrash is saying that when he's talking to Moshe Rabbeinu about Galus and Galus Mitzrayim, he has to reference this idea of going out with great wealth, because this is one of the fundamental conditions in the whole story, in the whole process. So the fact that the Medrash brings this up is understood. The fact that the Medrash has to address the Venasati is Chain, and go back to Yetzu B'Chus Gadol, that is clearly understood because the pasuk is telling us that this is one of the major details in the saga of going down into Mitzrayim and ultimately going out of Mitzrayim. And therefore, but what we do have to understand, was meint der Medrash mit dem, was is mamshich, bichdei shelo yipischem pel Avram Avinu? What does the Medrash mean by saying that Hashem has to do this so that way there shouldn't be an opening for Avram to complain? Why would Avram's complaint make a difference? Even if Avram wouldn't complain, the Eibishter made a promise. The Eibishter said that there's going to be the Yidden are going to go down into a strange land, and they're going to be enslaved and oppressed, and then they're going to go out with great wealth. So for the very fact that the Eibishter made this promise, the Eibishter has to fulfill his promise. Why does the Eibishter have to bring in Avram Avinu and say, I have to avoid Avram's complaint? That's the Rebbe's first question. Now, the Rebbe is going to introduce a Gemara where the Gemara says the same thing. This Gemara is going to be relevant later in the Sikha as well. In this Sif, the Rebbe is just going to clarify that this question that we have on the Medrash in Sif Aleph doesn't apply to the Gemara, and the Rebbe will explain why. The Mzelben Inyan, adas was Eden haben gedarft Scheuel sein von den Mitzrayim Klei Kesef v'chulu, is Kedei Avram soll nicht haben die Teine v'avodum kiyim v'achrech en yetzu b'rechuz gadolei kiyim. This same concept that before Yidden go to Mitzrayim, they're going to have to borrow the gold and the silver from Mitzrayim, so that Avram should not have a complaint that Hashem did not fulfill his promise of the Yidden going out with great wealth. We find in Sif Aleph the Rebbe was quoting a Medrash Rabbah, Shemos Rabbah. In Sif Beis, the Rebbe brings the same idea from a Gemara in Brachas. But over there, the necessity, the need to invoke Avram is understood. In other words, our whole question in Sif Aleph, at the end of Sif Aleph, is why do we have to bring up Avram? Hashem made a promise, Hashem has to keep his promise. Why does he have to keep it only because Avram shouldn't complain? So in Sif Beis, the Rebbe says that in the Gemara Brachas, that won't be a question. Why? Because the Gemara tells us in Pasuk in Parshas Boy, Daber na ba'azni ha'am, v'yishelu v'gomer. In contrast to the Medrash, which is focusing on a Pasuk in Parshas Shemos, and the Parsha that we're learning now, v'nasati es chen ha'am, the Gemara in Brachas is focusing on a Pasuk in Parshas Boy. In dem Ansag von Eibishten zu Moshe, as Eden sollen Scheuel sein von den Mitzrayim Nechush. Over there, it's already in the actual story. It's not Hashem telling Moshe what's going to happen. Over there, it's actually in the story. The Yidden are getting ready to go to Mitzrayim, and Hashem says to Moshe that the Yidden have to request of the Mitzrayim to give them their wealth. Unis Masber, and the Gemara explains. The yeshiva of Rabbi Yana is taught. Ein no el loshen bakasha. When it says in the pasuk daber no. No is an expression of a plea. Hashem said to Moshe, I plead with you. Go tell the Yidden, I plead of you. Ask of the Egyptians their gold and their silver. So that way, that tzaddik, the Gemara does not specify who the tzaddik is. Pirish Rashi Avram. Avram explains that the Eibishter is referring to Avram Avinu. He shouldn't say that he fulfilled the slavery, but he didn't fulfill the wealth. So that's what the Gemara in Brachas says, that the Eibishter is asking Moshe, is pleading of Moshe, that he should plead of the Jews that they should go and ask for the wealth. Thus says the Gemara of the Shaila, why did the Eibishter have to ask of the Jews or plead with the Jews? And as it says the word daber no, that they should go and ask of the Egyptians for the gold and the silver. Hagam, as in even though at that situation that they were in, they weren't thinking about wealth at all. As the Gemara says that they said to Moshe, if only we can just get out. We don't want the money. We don't need their wealth. Just get us out of here. Is the Gemara Mevair? So the Gemara is asking, why is there such an emphasis over here that the Yidden have to request it? So the Gemara explains, even though Yidden are asking to forego the great wealth and from the perspective of the Yidden themselves. Hashem could have listened to them. But Hashem cannot fulfill their request and forego the wealth and just take them out of Mitzrayim. So that way the tzaddik, namely Avram Avinu, should not have a complaint against Hashem that he didn't fulfill the promise of wealth. So over there it makes sense because there's two layers. There's one fact that the Eibishter's promise, and that the Yidden were ready to forgo. So Hashem says, I can't, because I made a promise to Avram. So therefore, over there, it makes sense why Avram is brought into the picture. But in the Medrash, where it's not discussing the command to the Yidden to ask of the Mitzrayim. Rather, the Medrash is talking about what the Eibishter is going to do. I will grant favor, etc. So why do we have to bring up the idea of Avram's complaint? Why isn't it enough that the Eibishter made a promise and the Eibishter has to fulfill that promise? So we're still asking the same question. We're strengthening the question by saying, Mela in the Gemara, where the Gemara is talking about what the Yidden have to do, not what Hashem is doing. So the answer is going to be that the Yidden have to do it because Avram wants it. Avram is going to want it. But in the Medrash, on Parashas Shemos, where he's talking about what the Eibishter is going to do, the Eibishter is going to do it because the Eibishter said he's going to do it. Seemingly, not because Avram is going to complain. So why bring in Avram? So Gimel, the Rebbe is going to ask a number of nuances in this Medrash. There's a number of nuances, and amongst them are as follows. Aleph, what is the emphasis on the word bohem? That he fulfilled with them the slavery, but he did not fulfill with them the wealth. It could have just said that the slavery, the oppression, he fulfilled. And the going out with great wealth, he didn't fulfill. Why bohem? Base. Was ist die Teine in der Neufen als der Kiyum von dem Yitzhak B'chus Gadol wird gefordert, weil sie ist gewähnt der Kiyum von Vavadum V'inu Oisam. Why is the complaint of Avram structured in a way that because he fulfilled the slavery, therefore he has to fulfill the wealth? Seemingly, the main complaint is that they're not going out with great wealth. You promised them great wealth, and they're not going out with great wealth. Why are these two details intertwined? Why is the taina structured? Because you fulfilled the slavery, so therefore you have to fulfill. No, the question is, why are you not giving them the wealth that you promised them? Gimel, third question. And this question is going to contrast the Medrash to the Gemara, and there will be two differences in the wording of Medrash versus Gemara. Was ist der Tam von dem Shini al Shenis versus Medrash and Gemara? In Medrash state Aleph shlo yepischim peh. The Medrash says it should not be an opening to complain. Beis la Avram Avinu, and it mentions Avram Avinu's name specifically. And in Gemara Aleph shlo yoymar, he shouldn't say, he doesn't use the term pischim peh. And Beis oisei tzaddik, it doesn't mention Avram Avinu. It only refers to him as a tzaddik. Since the Medrash begins with the words Masha Amarti Lavram, that which I spoke to Avram. So mentioning the name Avram again seems to be superfluous. Whereas in Gemara, Avram's name is mentioned at all. And yet, the Gemara still uses the term Oisei Tzaddik without mentioning his name. So it seems that in the Medrash he mentions him twice. He starts out saying, I'm talking about Avram Avinu, and still he has to mention his name again, that Pischim Peh LeAvram Avinu. Whereas in the Gemara, it doesn't start out saying that we're talking about Avram Avinu. And then, when he refers to Avram Avinu, he doesn't even mention his name, even though he hasn't mentioned his name yet. So that's our third question. Pischim Peh, Avram Avinu versus Yoymar and Oisei Tzaddik. So in short, we're trying to understand, number one, why is Avram Avinu's complaint so important here in this picture? Why is it not just about the fulfillment of Hashem's promise? And then why the Lashon Bohem? Why is Yetzu B'chus Gadol dependent on the Vavadum V'inu Oisam? Why is the wealth dependent on the slavery? And number 3 or 4, why these two differences between Medrash and Gemara? So to understand all this, we have to introduce the following. The Eibishter has to fulfill the promise because he made the promise. Because he made this promise. The Rebbe brings a number of psukim here. Number one, Hashem is not a human who can speak falsely. Does the Eibishter speak and not do? Say something and not fulfill it? I will not desecrate my covenant. I will not change that which comes out of my lips. So these are a number of psukim that show that the Eibishter always fulfills his promise. And therefore it wasn't just about avoiding Avram's complaint. So therefore we are compelled to say, as that without giving the grace of granting the favor of the Jewish people in the eyes of the Egyptians, Hashem could have fulfilled his promise. And still, even after fulfilling his promise, there will still be a complaint. There will still be room for Avram to complain. So in other words, we're already answering the question. Why does he say Why does the Medrash say about Avram Avinu? Because the Medrash is talking about something, not the basic fulfillment of Hashem's promise. In other words, there is a layer where Hashem fulfills the promise and it does not satisfy Avram Avinu. And that's why what's happening over here is not about the promise of Hashem. It's about satisfying Avram Avinu's version of the Eibishter's promise. And das is the Medrash Mechadish, and that's the Chiddush of this Medrash. Davke durch dem, was die Avtache wird ausgeführt in dem Eufen. Von Venosati is Chenam as a Beni Mitzrayim. Only when Hashem's promise is fulfilled in a way where He will grant the favor of the Jewish people in the eyes of the Egyptians. Vert bavoren shelo yipischim pel Avram Avinu. Only then does that placate Avram Avinu's complaint. So in other words, in order for the Eibishter to fulfill his promise, he has to give them a Rechus Gadol. As we'll see, the Rebbe is going to explain this at length. This is sort of a glimpse into what the long answer is going to be. But in a nutshell, the answer is as follows. The Eibishter could have given him a Rechus Gadol, and that would have fulfilled his promise. But in order to placate Avraham Avinu, there has to be v'nosati es chen ha'am. It's not enough Rechus Gadol. Not enough to give them the wealth. It has to be in a way where they find favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians come and give it to them. And that's the chiddush of this medrash. That v'nosati es chen, this form of giving Rechus Gadol, that is in order to placate Avraham and not leave room for him to complain. And in them chiddush is the Gemara Meisif Nachmer, and the Gemara that we learned, the Gemara Brachis, is actually saying even more than that. It's not enough in Nosati Eschein. The dinyan from Nosati Eschein Namaz Ben Mitzrayim, so that way the Mitzrayim should loan them their things, and the Yidden should leave laden with goods. Is noch echt nicht in ganzen Maß, because it's not either entirely sufficient. As a gedarf sein in a nation from Daber no ba'ozni am v'yishalu, it had to be in a way where the Eibishter pleads of the Yidden that they should ask the Egyptians for their wealth. Yidden sollen beten das bei den Mitzrayim. Was der Mitwert in ganzen nicht sein Kimakum zu Tainas Avram, and only then does it entirely remove Avram's Taina. So already we have a basic understanding of where the Rebbe is going to be going here. The Rebbe is explaining the Medrash that there's three layers here. There's one is wealth that would have fulfilled Hashem's promise. There's another layer, and that is that the Mitzrayim should give it to them in a way of an osati eschein ha'am. And that's what the Medrash is saying. That is how we fulfill. That is how the Avram's Taina is fulfilled. And the Gemara is saying even more than that. It can't just be v'nosati eschein. It has to be that they have to ask for it, and they have to be given to it after they have to be given it after they're asked, and only then is Avram's complaint, Avram's potential complaint, removed entirely. And from this point in Sif Hey, Vav, and Zayin, the Rebbe is going to explain what's the difference between the Rechus Gadol, v'nosati eschein, and the Yishalu. What is the difference between these three layers? Der Bir Bazeh. So to explain all of this, the Gemara that tells him Masechtas Sanhedrin as Bisman Alexander is Moikdoin. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that in the time of Alexander the Great, or Alexander of Macedonia, the Egyptians came with a complaint as Eden's on zurückgeben die Kasse versorgt, was zurückgenommen. They said you borrowed it for 3 days. You said you were coming back. You never came back. You ran off with all of our wealth. We want it back. And the Gourarie says over there that there was a great concern how to respond to this. And there was a Yid by the name of Gvia ben Pesisa who said he will represent the Yid and the Jewish people. Gvia ben Pesisa again, for Gvia ben Pesisa went to Alexander the Great, and he said, give us the wages for 600,000 people who worked for 210 years. And the Mitzrayim ran away. They had no answer. In other words, they were asking back for their money. So but Gvia ben Pesisa says, you owe us wages for 210 years of working. If you want us to give it back, we'll give it back, but then you have to give us our wages. And that was enough to respond to the Mitzrayim. As the Rechus Gadol was Eden, aber gekrogen von den Mitzrayim, hat sie gekommt als gezollt Tashlum für sie die Mitzrayim. So the Mefarshim explain that the Rechus Gadol, the great wealth that the Yidden received on the way out of Mitzrayim, it was owed to them as wages, as payment for their work in Mitzrayim. Oh. Now, says the Rebbe, we're going to see that one purpose of giving the Yidden great wealth was to punish the Mitzrayim. And as we just explained, it was also as a reward, as a payment to the Yidden. Since there's two elements in this Rechus Gadol, A, as a punishment to the Egyptians, and B, as a payment to the Yidden, so we can look at this in two different approaches. Which of the two is the primary and which of the two is the secondary? Is it primarily a punishment to the Mitzrayim, or is it primarily a payment to the Yidden? Aleph, one way, Adas was the Mitzrayim, aber gedacht, wegen the Yidden der Rechus, is the Ikir als eines for the Mitzrayim. That primarily this was a punishment to the Egyptians. Fathers are in the pasuk by Bris ben Besarim. And this would explain the pasuk, which Hashem says to Avram Avinu, the nation that enslaved them, I will punish them, I will judge them. And then the Yidden will go out with great wealth. As the Yetzu B'Rechus Gadol is that they're going out with great wealth is a part of the judgment on the Egyptians. That says Be'ikir is the Derenis from Mitzrayim, which would mean that primarily the punishment is you will empty out Mitzrayim. Nor, what are you going to do with the money? You're taking it away from the Egyptians as a punishment. What do you do with it? You're giving it to the Yidden. Why to them? Since the Yidden worked for the Egyptians, is their einish from the Mitzrayim, their punishment is set up in a way as the Yidden should get it as wages, as payment. But primarily this is a punishment on the Mitzrayim. That's one way of looking at it. Base, as the Rechus Gadol is the other way is to say is that the Rechus Gadol, this great wealth, was established as a way to pay the Yidden for the slavery and the oppression that they experienced. And the fact that the Yetzu B'Rechus Gadol, the great wealth, goes together with the Dononechi, the punishment, the judgment upon Egypt, is because together with paying the Yidden, it also served as a punishment for the Egyptians. It says that much of their wealth was taken from them to the point that Mitzrayim, Egypt, was emptied out. So the Rebbe is telling us that based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that and the Mefarshim over there, that the Rechus Gadol was a payment to the Yidden. But at the same time, we see in the pasuk that it served as an einish, as a punishment. So there's two ways of looking at it. One is primarily a punishment, and then when you have all this money, what do you do with it? Give it to the victim. Or number two is a payment. Except how was the payment set up? That it should come from the Mitzrayim. It should also be a punishment. The Chelek just in the Tzeifanim is, what would be the difference between these two approaches? In the first way, that it's more about punishing the Mitzrayim, that in what manner it reaches the Jewish people is not relevant. The Zach is, as the Rechus Gadol soll zugenommen werden von den Mitzrayim. The most important part is that it should be taken away from the Egyptians. Das, was es kommt zu Eden, is blaze a Indian study. And the fact that it's being given to the Yidden is only a side detail. Is my nafkamina the Nathan Baza. So why would it matter how it got to them? The Rebbe explains, what do you mean how it gets to them? When the Yidden wollten dem Rechush Gadol zugenommen von den Mitzrayim B'shas Makas Choshech. If, for example, the Yidden had broken in, as they did, to the homes, they went in to the homes of the Egyptians. So during Makas time, they went and they saw where the wealth was, they didn't take anything. Had they taken it during the Makkah of Choshech, of darkness, L'dugma, for example, it still would have accomplished the intent of the great wealth. According to this approach, then the most important part was to take it away from the Mitzrayim. How it got to the Yidden matters very little. The most important part is that the Mitzrayim don't have it. But if you're looking at it in the second way, that primarily this is being given to them as payment for their slavery, that it has to be given in a manner of payment. After Baiz and Goli v'nirgish, as the Mitzrayim given us the Eden, has to be obvious that the Mitzrayim the Egyptians are giving it to the Jewish people. This is but selling them that they're paying. Und das ist, was der Medri sagt. Als Davke der mit, was der Rebbe hat gesagt, wenn es hatte, ist keine Amazeh, wird bei Waren, Chelek, Pischem, Pelle, Avram, Avinu, Leimar, Vavadum, Vinu, Esum, Kiyim, Behem, Vachrech, Yitzhak, B'chazgal, Leikiyim, Behem. And that's what the Medri means when it says that only if it's done in a way of, I will grant the favor of these people in the eyes of the Egyptians, that would not leave room for Avram to have this argument. Yes, the very promise of Hashem that there'll be wealth. In welches is nicht ausgestellt geworden befehlish where Hashem did not specify specifically what the purpose is. Is it a punishment or is it a payment? Can ausgeführt werden, euch wenn das ist in der Saifin, as in dem ist Nikir heb sagt, as euch wenn das ist in an Eufin, as in dem ist Nikir heb sächtlich, der Zada eines für die Mitzrayim und nicht das Zada schar war Tagmuf der Welt für ihn vernieden. Since Hashem did not specify whether he was doing it as payment or as punishment, then if you see the punishment aspect and not the payment aspect, you still have fulfilled the promise of Hashem. Hashem said, so let's say the Yidden took all of this wealth during Makas Choshech. Hashem's promise is fulfilled. Avram can't. But no one could say Hashem has a promise to fulfill. He did it. But Avram could still have a problem with that. Because you're seeing the punishment of the Mitzrayim, you're not seeing the fact that it's a payment to the Yidden because they didn't get paid. They took it. But if it was done in that way, in a way where you don't see clearly that that the Yidden are getting paid, that would leave an opening for Avram Avinu. Avram der Av von Am Yisrael, Mont, Avram, who's the father, and that's why we'll see later, there's an emphasis over here, Avram Avinu. The Medrash mentions him not by Oisei Tzaddik, but Avram Avinu, because Avram, as the father of the Jewish people, Mont, he demands, as the Mechuvim from the Rechuz Gadol Zayin Beikil L'Teves Yisrael, that the purpose of giving them the wealth is primarily for their benefit, the benefit of the Yidden. Thus, is an inyan von schar for va'avadum. It's a payment for their hard work. And only then does it console them for the bitter galus that they experienced in Mitzrayim. So, this is the explanation of what the Rebbe started explaining in Siv Dalid. Why there's two layers here. Rechuz Gadol, which fulfills Hashem's promise, could be done even if they got the money in the middle of the night somewhere where no one is looking. But Avram wants more than that. Avram wants it to be given to them directly as payment. And therefore, if not the Vinasati is Cheina where the Mitzrayim are going to actually give it to them willingly, as we'll see in a moment, the Avram's taina is not placated. And therefore, Avram comes and says, I want them to be able to be obvious that I'm giving a payment, that it's being given as payment, and therefore the Vanosati is Chain, that answers Avram, that answers Avram's taina. Der mit is move on. Was der Pischim Pef von Avram ist als Vachrech in Chulu Leikiyim Behem ist verbunden mit der Agdama von Vavadum Vinu Esim Kiyim Behem. This answers a second question of Seif Gimel, with regards to why are the two dependent on each other. Why is the V'achrech Yitzhak B'chuz Gadol dependent on the Vavadum Vinu Esim? Well, that's the Yisait from the Pischim Pef B'chuz Gadol, because that's the foundation of Avram's potential complaint with regards to the wealth. Since they're the ones who experience the Vavadum Vinuisam, it is Bechayiv as Eich the Vachlich Yetzer B'chus Godel, so Zayin and Nefel von Kiyam Behem. That makes it necessary that also the great wealth should be with them. Not just that it should be taken from the Egyptians, but that it should be given to them. Under fire is the taste for Sadgasha Kiyam Behem Nit Kiyam Stam. And this answers the first question of Sif Gimel, the emphasis of Behem, because that is Avram's Taina. Since they're the ones that went through the slavery, they have to be the ones that get the wealth. Not just get the wealth, but it has to be given to them as payment. The Yidden don't feel, the Yidden should feel that it was a promise to them, and for them, as a payment and as wages for their work and for their suffering. And in order to placate this complaint, as the Mitzrayim. So to answer this, Hashem arranges that the wealth should get to them in a way that it should be given with grace from their own will. Happily and willingly. But das ist madgish, der Chus Gadol is verbunden mit den Vavaden Vinuisam, which emphasizes that the great wealth is connected with the slavery. In other words, because the Mitzrayim are giving it to them directly, this shows that they're being paid for their work, not just taking it from the Mitzrayim to punish them. So this, besides for the question about the differences in the Gemara versus the Medrash, which is going to be answered in Siv Zayin, our questions were answered. Why does he mention Kadesh Le'Pischim Peh? Because the whole Chiddush of the Medrash is that it's V'nosati Eschein. It's not just being taken from the Egyptians, but it's being given to the Yidden gracefully and willingly, because Avram's Taina is not just about fulfilling the wealth, but giving it in a way that it is obviously a payment for their hard work and a consolation for their suffering. And the Gemara takes it another level and adds on to how we have to address Avram's Taina. By bringing this idea in connection with the pasuk, please speak to the people, and they should ask for this wealth. When the Mitzrayim given the Eden by Maru's game from Mitzrayim, because the Gemara is saying that even if the Mitzrayim are going to give the Eden gold and silver and all this wealth happily, as is indemnity can't take away from gold. If it is compared you could still say 1 second. How do I know that this is actually a payment for their hard work? As one could say they're giving them gifts, they're giving them goodbye presents. Or they're giving them stuff so that they shouldn't leave empty-handed. It would be very sad for them to have to travel through the desert with nothing. So they're giving them something. They shouldn't go away empty-handed. This is a reference. This Sinis Matanis or Be'erum B'Chayis Sekel is a reference to a sikha we learned last year in Chelek Yutes, I believe, a parsha today about Ha'anaka. What would be the idea of Ha'anaka? Ha'anaka is the gifts that are given to an Eved or an Amma Ivriya, to a servant, to a slave, after they leave, and the Rebbe over there discusses the various different elements of is it a payment, is it a gift, is it just to make the person feel like a something that they have what to leave with something in their pocket. But anyway, so the Gemara is saying that Avram Avinu's Taina doesn't get placated just by the fact that the Mitzrayim are giving it to the Yidden, because we still don't know that they're giving it as schar, as payment. It could be they're just giving them a gift. Und der Rieber, in den ganzen Dominion von Wachrech und Yitzhak B'chus Gadol Kiyam Bohem, as man soll wissen, klarer, dass es schar aveda, and in order for the Yidden, in order for to fully address this idea that it should be very clear that this wealth is being given to them as payment, Hashem commanded that those slaves, those workers, who did so in a way that they were oppressed, Alain Davke Zon Betten, they should ask, and an impactful ask. monin, to demand by the Mitzrayim the Rechus Gadol, but das beweist begodli as the Rechus Kumtzei. By asking for it, this shows that it's not a gift; it's something that is owed to them. In other words, they had the right to demand it. So it wasn't a handout; it was something that they earned by saying, "Give us wealth." That is them coming and saying, "We deserve this. We earned this. We worked for it." It's not just where they're asking for a handout. So that's the next level. In other words, the Medrash is saying as long as the Mitzrayim are giving it to them, that shows that it's for them and it's not just to punish the Mitzrayim, which is true. Says the Gemara, Avraham Avinu is still not satisfied because it's still not clear that it's payment versus a gift. And therefore, when they ask for it, that clarifies that it is payment because it shows that they have the right to ask for it and it's not just a handout. And now this will explain. Based on this, we can explain the differences in the wording of the Medrash versus the Gemara, which was our third question of Siv Gimel. This will help us understand the differences in the wording of the Gemara versus the Medrash. That in the Gemara it says Yoimar, Shalo Yoimar, versus Shlo Pischim Peh. And it says, it refers to him as the tzaddik, the righteous one, and not by the name of Avraham Avinu. So Rebbe explains, if it was in a way that they gave it on their own initiative, as the Medrash is insinuating, it would still prove that the wealth belongs to the Yidden and it's being given to them for their benefit. The word pischein peh means pischein peh means that someone else opens a mouth that's unopened. In other words, the Mitzrayim, if they given it and gave to Zogin, as if the Mitzrayim wouldn't have given it, then you could say Hashem didn't fulfill his promise. But over here, he did fulfill his promise. In other words, even if you're going to say that it wasn't to the fullest extent, it still is not a pischein peh. It still doesn't give Avram the right to come and argue that he didn't fulfill the promise. Avram still has something to say. We'll see, Shalo Yoimar. But to say pischein peh, to say that he has an opening to complain, that is not there because they got the money. And it was given to them by the Mitzrayim, so it was given to them. They got to the Chus Gadol, they got it in a way that it was given to them directly and not that they had to sneak it out in the middle of the night. So there's no pischein peh. It's not like there's an opening here, a space of a void where Avram could come out and say, 1 second, this is not what we made up. And says, no, Avram still has something to say. And he refers to him not as Avinu, but as tzaddik, which means to say he's coming from the place of beyond the letter of the law. He's coming from a place of the ultimate righteousness and justice. Because Avram is the ultimate expression of tzedek and yosher, of righteousness and justice. It's still room to say, because they just experienced such a harsh slavery and oppression, they deserve to be repaid with great wealth, in a way that it is very clearly obvious that it's their payment. That would be a more perfect version of the fulfillment of the promise of the Chus Gadol, which is fulfilled by them asking for it, demanding it, and then getting it. But it's not a full taina. Avram can't have a full taina, so you can't use the word pischein peh. And he's using the word Oisei Tzaddik to emphasize that this is Avram's additional point based on Shlemus HaTzaddik V'Yosher, the ultimate righteousness and justice. And that explains why the Gemara, which is talking about an extreme version of the fulfillment of Hashem's promise B'Shlemus, uses different words in the Medrash. So in very short, the Eibishter promise to the Chus Gadol. One way of doing that could have been by giving them, let's say, for example, they would have taken it during Makas Cheshech. That would have been fulfillment of the promise to Avram, of the promise Yetzu B'Chus Gadol. But that was not good enough. Hashem was concerned that this would still leave Avram with a complaint. 1 second, where do you see the benefit of the Yidden here? Where do you see that the Yidden were the victim, so to speak, and that they deserve this money? Therefore, Hashem says, "V'nosati eschein ha'am." I will do it in a way that they will do it in a graceful way, in a willing way, and they will actually give it to them, which then we see clearly that the Yidden are getting something for their hard work. And the Gemara says more than that, it's not enough that it should be given to them. It has to be given to them in a way that they're asking for it, they're demanding it, which proves even more that it's being given to them as a payment for what they earned, for what they've experienced in Mitzrayim. So now we're going to go into the Bir Ba'avei Ruchnis. We're going to discuss the fact that the Rechus Gadol, the great wealth, are the Nitzutzos, the holy sparks that had fallen in Mitzrayim, and the Yidden were refining and elevating them in Mitzrayim. And we're going to follow down this path of the two approaches. The approach of, is it for Mitzrayim? Is it a punishment for Mitzrayim, or is it a payment to the Yidden? And we're going to see the same thing. Beruchnius, is it about the nitzutzos? Is it about the sparks, or is it about the journey and the higher levels that the Yidden can attain as they do what they're supposed to do? It's well known. Chassidus explains it based on the Kisvei Arizal, that the great wealth that was in Mitzrayim refers to, on a deeper level, the sparks of holiness that were there, including the sparks that were in the gold and silver that had to be taken with them at the Nachke from the Mishkan and Michlal Genutz B'Kedusha, which were then taken for the building of the Mishkan and in general used in a holy manner. So it wasn't just the sparks that were in Mitzrayim, but things that they took with them from Mitzrayim, which were refined or elevated through Golos Mitzrayim. And the whole purpose of them experiencing Golos Mitzrayim was to fulfill the promise of the great wealth, to remove and elevate the sparks of holiness that are in Mitzrayim. Parenthetically speaking, when I mean to say is we're going to get back to this, but just the Rebbe adds over here that this actually answers a question. Since Yidden were ready to forego the great wealth. As we brought in the beginning of the Sikh, the Yidden said, leave us alone with this wealth. All we want to do is get out. The Gemara brings the mashal over there from someone who was in jail, and they said to him, if you wait till tomorrow to go out, we're going to give you a lot of money. So he says, I'd rather go out today with no money. Get me out as soon as possible. Similarly, the Yidden said, let's get out of Mitzrayim. Who needs the money? He said, so why did the Rebbe not listen? If the Yidden were ready to forego on the Rechus Gadol, why did the Rebbe not listen to them and take them out? Now this is moving to Pasuk, but according to the fact that we say Al Pi Chasidus, Al Pi Pnimi Yonim, that the Rechus Gadol represents the holy sparks, so it's understood why Hashem couldn't take them out without the Rechus Gadol. The Rechus Gadol was given an Iker Tzvek from Golos Mitzrayim because that was a major purpose in the whole Golos Mitzrayim. Without the Rechus Gadol, the whole purpose is not fulfilled. So that helps us understand what's happening over here. Why the Eibishter is insisting on the Rechus Gadol, even though the Yidden were ready to forego. And technically, Hashem made a haftacha, true. But if the Yidden said, listen, we don't need you to fulfill this promise, Hashem technically could have said, okay, you're right, let's get out. But he couldn't do that because there was a whole bunch of nitzotzos, of holy sparks that have to come on with him. Now going back to this Mitzrayim experience, and through the hard work, through the slave labor, which means to say, through their efforts to elevate and to refine the sparks in Mitzrayim, and the Yidden asked them, this elevates the Yidden themselves. So number one, the Yidden are going to work hard and thus to elevate the sparks that are there. And because they're the ones that are doing it, this hard work, they themselves become elevated. They will go out with great wealth. It doesn't say they'll take the wealth will go out with them. It says they will go out with great wealth. As the Yidden received and then went out with his great wealth. The fact that it says they're going to go out with Rechus Gadol is because they themselves were elevated by doing what they're doing. So just like we said before, in the first part of the Sikha, that there's two elements to the Rechus Gadol. One, a punishment to the Mitzrayim, and two, reward or payment for the Yidden. Similarly, in the Beruchnius, one is that the purpose of going down was Birur HaNitzutzos, to elevate the sparks of Mitzrayim, and the holiness that's in Mitzrayim, and two, the elevation that the Yidden receive through their Aved. So now, let's understand this on a spiritual level. If you say that the great wealth was primarily a punishment for the Mitzrayim, this would mean that the primary purpose of going out of Mitzrayim, of going into Mitzrayim, is to go and remove, to elevate the sparks, that the sparks should become refined. But in addition to that, because who is accomplishing it, the Yidden are the ones that are doing it, the Yidden deserve a reward, which is the next level that they reach because of their Aveda. So that's one way. That's the first approach, that the Yidden are going in for the sparks, and it's just that they're going to get a side benefit from it. They will also be elevated because they're the ones that are doing it, but the main purpose is the sparks, not the Yidden. Avram Avinu overcooked of them Rechus Gadol, but Avram was the father of Klal Yisrael. As we said before, Avram doesn't care so much about punishing the Mitzrayim as much as he cares about the benefit that comes to the Yidden. Similarly, when it comes to the Birurim, Avram wants to see how is this going to help the Jewish people. That the Yidden should experience the Rechus Gadol. As the Mechuvah for Golos Mitzrayim is, Avram says the purpose of Golos Mitzrayim is so that the Yidden should be elevated, should reach their ultimate perfection. When their father the Rebbe said, and that's the Rebbe sent them down to Mitzrayim, so that way they could elevate those holy sparks, so that way they should reach their state of perfection. So says the Mechuvah is the Tales of Aliyah, which means Avraham Avinu's perspective is that the purpose of all these birurim is the benefit and the elevation that the Yidden experience. How do they get there? Through elevating the sparks. But what is it about? It's about the Yiddens reaching their next and their ultimate level. And therefore Avraham Avinu says it's not enough to give them the great wealth. It has to be done in a way where the Yidden go out laden with goods. When the Mitzrayim geben sie Rechus zu Eden, nicht die Eden nehmen das allein, wird gebracht as the Birur HaNitzutzos to the Aliyah von Eden. Instead of the Yidden sneaking it out or taking it away from them, which then it's more about it being taken from the Mitzrayim, it's more about the elevation of the sparks, then you don't see so much the benefit of the Yidden. But when the Mitzrayim have to give it to the Yidden, you see that the Yidden are the ultimate purpose here. Therefore, the sparks of Kedusha themselves are helping the Yidden. The Mitzrayim, who are the sparks, are helping the Yidden get out. And helping the Yidden fulfill their Aveda of elevating the sparks. As it is known, as the Friedrich Rebbe explains in a Maimer, where it says, Hashem will be at my help, but it says help in the plural. As the Friedrich Rebbe explains, as in Nitzotzos HaKdusha v'chaver nizbarer al Avedis Adam, that those sparks of holiness that are elevated by the person then become his helpers. Misayim v'oizrim zum Adam Aved Avedasei. They help the person who's doing his Aveda. So the Rebbe explains this based on what we're saying over here in the Sikha. And the fact that the sparks of holiness become the person's helpers is a result of the fact was that Ikir Mechuvah from the Birur HaNitzutzos is Bishvil Yisrael K'nei Yidden Zol Nesaleveren, because the whole purpose of this is for the Yidden. So therefore, since the whole purpose of this, if the purpose was the spark, to elevate the spark, so once the spark is elevated, the job is done. So why do you need the spark now to come and help the Yid? But if the Yid is the ultimate purpose of all of this, then the ultimate display that the job was done is when the spark then goes and helps the Yid. Because since the goal is the Yid, the goal is the elevation, the aliyah that the Yid achieves. So that is the bekitzer. So that is the two approaches that we were talking about earlier in the Sikha, but now from a Pnimiyus Yanim, that if the whole purpose is Bidur Nitzutzos, then it doesn't matter how the Yidden take it. As long as the Nitzutzos are taken and elevated, the job is done. But Avraham Avinu says, no, I wanted to benefit the Yidden. And in order to benefit the Yidden, it has to be done in a way that the Mitzrayim give it to the Yidden. In other words, that the Nitzetzes begin to help the Birurim, or the Mevarer, the person who's doing the Avodah, and that proves that this is not just about Birur Nitzutzos, it's also, or primarily, about elevating the Yid who's doing the Avodah. So this is how we've translated what's happening in Mitzrayim on a spiritual or on a pneumistic level. In Sif Yud, the Rabbi is going to now apply this to each and every Yid as he comes down into this world. These two approaches can also be seen in the Aveda of every single Yid, which, as we know, the descent of the Neshama into this world is a galus, is an exile for the Neshama. But again, over here, you're going to see that there's two elements to this exile. The purpose of the descent of the soul is to refine his body, his animal soul, and his portion of this world. To bind them and to unite them with the light of the Eibishter. Which is how we fulfill that which the Eibishter wants, that he should have a dwelling place in this world. Which means to say, when we transform the guf and the nefesh abamis and the chelke ba'olam, that it should be filled with godliness, then God can dwell comfortably in this world. And when the neshama comes down into this world and carries out his avodah of refining and cleansing the world, this descent is for the purpose of an ascent. This causes that the neshama should be elevated even higher than it was before it came down into this world. So that way the neshama can reach its ultimate perfection. And there's again two ways of looking at this, two approaches, as we explained earlier with regards to the Galus Mitzrayim. That the primary goal is the world, that the world should become cleansed, refined, and a dwelling place for Hashem. Now, but it's just that because the Yidden are the ones that accomplish this task to create this dira, this dwelling place for Hashem, that receive a reward. But this is the aliyah, which refers to the elevation or the next level that they attain because of their aveda. So the primary goal is to change the world, and the Yidden receive a fringe benefit because they're the ones that do it. Or beis, their tachlis hakavana is Yidden. Or you could say the other way, that the ultimate goal is Yidden, as a Yid of the Grechens, as a Nemes Shlemos, that a Yid should reach his ultimate level of completion, his ultimate perfection. But the way to get there is by refining the world. But it's not about the world; it's about the Yid. It's about the Yid reaching the ultimate state of perfection. So just as we said with regards to the two ways of Rechuz Gadol, literally, is it a einish, or is it a tashlum? Is it a punishment, or is it a payment to the Yidden? We say the same thing with regards to Beruchnius. Is it about the nitzitzes, the sparks that are in Mitzrayim, or is it about the elevation of the Jewish people that they attain because of what they did in Mitzrayim? And the same thing is with regards to every single neshama, that there's one way of saying that it's about elevating the world and making it a dira b'tachteinim, or two, it's about elevating the Yid through making a dira b'tachteinim. Die zwei Yefanim anal. So following this approach, so there's two ways of serving Hashem, or two ways of explaining the Yedidus and Neshama Lamata, the descent of the Neshama. Is it to change the world, or is it to change the Neshama? So these two approaches will actually affect, or be affected by, how the Neshama does its Avodah. Aleph, the Avodah b'birur element is with Kabbalah Selvi Evet Pashut. One approach is that he approaches it like a simple servant with Kabbalah Sel. Kabbalah Sel means submission. That he's not affected by what his avodah is accomplishing. Weiß nur ein Sache, he knows one thing, hat Schlichus von dem Ebersten. Was darf ausführen, he knows one thing, he has a mission from Hashem that he has to carry out. Es ist bei ihm aber nicht beschanav, was Schlichus tut. It doesn't affect him what his Schlichus will accomplish. He was given a task and he fulfills that task. What gets done because of that, it doesn't affect him. Und das getan mit der selbe Kabbalah Sale. As Alter Rebbe brings in the Good Torah, that this type of person is, if he was commanded to chop trees, he would do it with the same dedication and the same level of submission. Hashem told me to go out into the world and I go do it. Hashem told me to chop wood, I go chop wood. Whatever the Eibush tells me to do, that's what I do. That's one Eifen. Beis, another Eifen is where the person has a little bit more understanding in what he's doing. It's not just Kabbalah Sale. Even though he's approaching this with bittul. And Kabbalah Sale with submission and with acceptance of the Eibishter's authority. He understands the deeper purpose of what he's doing, that he's creating a dwelling place for Hashem. So Yid is doing the Avodah, whatever it is, Avodah, he's working with the world, he's elevating the world, he's doing the task. It's not about the outcome. The second level is that the Yid appreciates, understands what the purpose of it is, and therefore he does it with that in mind. Which the difference between these two will be expressed in the ascent of the neshama afterwards. Which is accomplished through his Aveda. Then sein Aveda is in the ersten Eifen mit der einzigen Matare bekommen zu durchfinden Schleibischen Schliches. If his Aveda is the first approach that is solely focused on fulfilling what the Eibishter gave him to do, demot is by him the Aliyah von Nishmasei, the in Nesus is an Aveda. Then the ascent that's accomplished is like an extra thing, an initial schar, like a reward. Which he receives afterwards. You did, the Eibishter gave you a task, you fulfilled the task. What's being accomplished doesn't matter to you. So once you've done your task, the Eibishter gives you a reward. The aliyah of the neshama goes up to another level. But if the person understands the inner purpose of the shlichus, then he understands what he's accomplishing, which is to bring together godliness and the world and to turn the world into a dwelling place for Hashem. Then it's not that the aliyah is as a reward, sort of a separate side thing, so to speak, from what he was doing. Nor v'ahamshich von der Aveda Gufa. It's part of the Aveda. Warum the Aliyah von der Neshama is doch in das Gufa. Because what is the elevation of the soul? This very thing, as the Amshachas HaAtzmus, was wird aufgetan durch ihr Aveda bebirru v'zicha chaylam, when the Dirul Atzmusi is barach, when it's galus to the Neshama. The whole, what's the Aliyah? What's shot that the Neshama is elevated? The fact that this idea that Atzmos is coming down into this world, the neshama should experience it. So if the person is not into what he's trying to accomplish, so he does it aveda, check, he fulfills the checklist, and then at the end he gets a prize, the aliyah of the neshama. But if the person understands what he's trying to accomplish, then so he's able to see the dira b'tachtenim that's happening, which means that Atzmos is being drawn down into this world. That is the aliyas neshama. That is the ascent of the neshama through the Aveda. So it's actually happening together with his Aveda. It's not something that comes afterwards as a schar. It's something that's happening simultaneously, which the neshama is able to experience, and that is its aliyah. So therefore, to summarize, we have two efanim in the purpose of the Yididus Neshama Lamata. Is it for the Olam, or is it for the Neshama? And these two approaches would affect, is the person doing the Aveda Bekvalas Oil, and therefore the focus is the Nitzutzos, or is the person doing the Aveda understanding the purpose of Dira B'Tachtonim, and then the Aliyas HaNeshama is the Iker. And not only that, but when he does it as in other words, when he does it to do the Avodah, Kabbalah's oil, then you have the aliyah that comes afterwards is separate. when the person understands what he's accomplishing, then the aliyah that the neshama gets is a chelik, is a part of the avodah. So if you think that we already went down this beautiful chart where we've created two concepts, two rows. One is the basic level where it's about Mitzrayim, where it's about the Nitzutzes HaKdusha, where it's about the Kabbalah's oil, where schar is just a davar noisif and not part of the Aveda, or it's about the Yidden, it's about the Aliyah that the Yid gets, or the Neshama gets, through the Aveda Sabirunim, it's about the Aveda where a person appreciates the Teichen HaShlichus, which is Direi B'Tachteinim, and the Aliyah of the Neshama is happening while he's doing the Aveda. So we have two rows. Now we're going to add a caveat, or we're going to break down row 2 into two separate rows, Medrash and Gemara. Because this second oifen, that the goal is the Aliyah of the Neshama, and that the person understands the Teichen HaShlichus, and therefore the Aliyah and Neshama is happening. I keep saying Aliyah and Neshama. I mean the Aliyah of the Neshama. The Aliyah Shalachri Ayirida, that the Neshama couldn't reach without the Avodah, happens as a chelik and a hemshich, as part of the person's Avodah. That itself can be subdivided into two approaches. Aleph, as a Teichen and Uftuf von seiner Avodah, werd bei ihm der Herd nicht beschasso Avodah gufe, nor bigmaro Avodah. B'shas is mashtem avidase kumt el diakara, was hat sich aufgetan bei avidase. Until now, I was saying when the Rebbe said nor via hemshich from the Avodah gufa, I was saying it happening simultaneously. So the Rebbe now says lavdavka. There's two ways of looking at it. You can say that he only really appreciates what he accomplished after he did it. Once he did the Avodah, he can appreciate what he accomplished. Beis as eich b'shaso Avodah gufa der hertet dem Teichen umchuvim from the Avodah. That even while he's doing it, he appreciates and experiences the ultimate purpose of what he's doing. Beis as tut Avodah in nidner b'chtei so durchfindig gewonnen von dem Ewigsten. Der das gufa is kidachlich sein kavana. Bereget beis Avodah. So much so that he's not just doing it because the Ewigsten says so. He wants to accomplish the Direi B'Tachteinim. In other words, he became part of the mission. That he understands the importance of it, and he's doing it because he wants to do it as well. Last leis barach Direi B'Tachteinim bringing the Welt l'Shleimusa, that he wants to bring the world to its ultimate completion, which is to make a Direi B'Tachteinim. So I might have jumped the gun earlier when I was saying it's happening simultaneously. In other words, the end of Sif Yudal that Rebbe is saying that it's not a davar noisif, but it's a chelik. In other words, it's not the aliyah of the neshama is not a cherry on top that happens as sort of a reward, but it's actually a chelik of the aveda, because the aveda is Direi B'Tachteinim, and the aliyah of the neshama is to experience that Direi B'Tachteinim. But now in a few days, the Rebbe breaks that down into two separate categories. Either that the Yid only begins to appreciate this once he completed his Avodah, or two, even during the Avodah, he becomes part of it, that he wants to create a Direi B'Tachteinim, and the reward, the aliyah of the neshama, is happening during and not just after. So now we're going to go back to the Medrash and the Gemara. We're going to say that these two approaches will follow the breakdown of Medrash versus Gemara in this case. Big Gemara. What does the Gemara say? In order to remove the possibility of Avram's complaint that Hashem did not fulfill the Chus Gadol, the Yidden had to ask the Egyptians. He does their far, weil das a Gemara, haben die Yidden euch beis ubizman hashibud der hert as their tachlis ha'avedes der Chus Gadol, because the Gemara would be like the second approach here in Sif Yud Beis, that even during the Aveda, the Yidden were able to appreciate that the whole purpose was to elevate the sparks. When the Rebbe does the Yidden allein b'ban Aveda, and if the Yidden demanded. Here we did all this work. Now, the whole purpose, the whole motivation, so to speak, of everything that they were doing was for the Chus Gadol, was for the Nitzutzos. So therefore, when they finish the Aveda, they say, give us the Nitzutzos. Whereas, according to the Medrash, the purpose of what they were doing was not understood during the Shibud. It was after everything. And therefore it's enough, it suffices that the Chus Gadol should be given to them after everything, at the Mitzrayim given the Eden canal, that they give it, because the purpose, when they were working, they were doing what they were doing, so because the Abisha told them to do so. Even though they understood the purpose, but it doesn't. They don't appreciate it until they finish. So therefore, once they get the nitzutzis, then they're satisfied. But according to the Gemara's approach, that while they were doing it, they already understood the idea of bir and nitzutzis. So therefore, they come and demand those nitzutzis, because that's a chelek of the avodah. The avodah is to make sure that they get those nitzutzis, so they can't really finish until they demand it and get it. From there's a lesson in our avodah. The Rabbi says in Tanya that our deeds, our avodah during galus. A yid should learn Torah, do mitzvahs because the Eibusher said so. And it doesn't affect the intensity or the involvement of what he does based on what is the purpose of what he's doing. He's doing it because the Eibusher said so. Therefore, it doesn't matter what era it is. Are we during the era of the Beis Hamikdash? Are we during the beginning of Galus? Or are we in the end, very end of Galus? The purpose is to do what the Eibusher wants. But if we are aware, if we are cognizant of the fact that we are in the heels of Mashiach, we are at the very end of Galus. And the ultimate purpose of everything that we're doing, which is the coming of Mashiach, is dependent on our avodah during Galus. That does go for that avodah. That itself has to be experienced within the avodah. In other words, the initial approach is that we're serving Hashem because Hashem said so. It doesn't matter what we're going to accomplish. But when we are able to appreciate that what we're doing now is actually achana to the geula, and the geula is dependent on what we're doing, so our avodah changes. Our avodah has to be with a greater intensity, knowing that we're bringing the geula. If a yid understands that his fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs is hastening the coming of Mashiach and the building of the Beis Hamikdash, which means that his avodah is bringing the world to its ultimate perfection, its ultimate purpose, for which it was created. Is an when a person realizes that his avodah can make a difference, that his avodah could actually bring about the ultimate completion and purpose of creation, which is to make a dir yizbarach, which is the geula, which is the ultimate redemption. So then this avodas Hashem is with much greater passion and with much greater vitality and with much greater chayis. And then when a person does his avodah, then his demanding and his wanting the coming of Mashiach is on a whole other level. We want Mashiach now. He demands it from the Eibusher. We want Mashiach now. I did the avodah. I understand that why I was doing what I was doing, and now I want Mashiach now. And this doing and this demanding, it actually hastens the geula of each and every yid. Together with the Eibusher who is in galus with us. Now, and it brings the geula right now.